to make this presentation special, I'd just like to share a little gesture with you to invite our minds to come to our hearts. So those who want can just close their eyes and bring their hand to where they think their thinking mind is. And then slowly inviting the mind, thinking mind, come with me. We lower our hand, just following the movement with our closed eyes. Until we get to the center of our upper chest. And for those who want to launch a desire to connect to their soul, their self, their deeper essence, they can. And then just touch very gently. Okay, thank you. For me, consciousness is not consciousness of something. We have different levels of consciousness. So we can come from the thinking mind to the feeling heart. And as I'm talking about embryology, I think I'd like you just to experience it through the heart, although I'm mentioning words and scientific facts. So who are we really? And does the dawn and the dusk of our life tell us more about the mystery of what we're apart? The dusk of life is now attracting attention in science with near-death experiences, but the dawn of life is still not attracting much attention by scientists, except as straight embryologists. And then can our embryological past tell us more about duality and non-duality? I'm not going to answer the questions for you, but I'm going to encourage you to answer questions for yourself. We have a problem. We have a problem in science because we feel the brain gives rise to consciousness. But for me, life is consciousness. So that little fertilized egg, is that not a living being? For instance, Blair Smith says it is a human being already, right from conceptus, and he doubts that genes can direct processes, especially the arrangement of form in space, because genes are in every cell, but something has to instruct the genes to what to program through that area. What I'm trying to do here is give you different lenses. Science, to me, in science, what we do is pick up a pair of spectacles and we look at life in a certain way. And each of us looks at life in a certain way. And when we use a certain lens, we'll see certain things. Somebody else picks up another lens and they'll see it differently. So what I want to talk about first is about life fields, which was the work of Burr in 1933 in Yale University. His work has largely been forgotten or neglected. And he took an unfertilized ovule, and he was working first on salamanders, and then he worked on frogs, and then he worked on chicks. And he found that he first had to construct an instrument, because science can only get as far as the instruments it has at its disposal. And he found near the equator of the egg was the positive potential, and near one space on the circumference was a negative potential. And he found after fertilization, I'm talking about potentials, non-visible aspect of nature. And after fertilization, he found the head was where the positive potential was, and the tail was where the negative potential was. And for me, this is a clear indication that there's a non-physical field primary to development. So this is just one of the scientists that point clearly that there is a non-physical field giving instructions to how to arrange matter, or form, which I prefer. Okay. Then another person who's influenced me is Jaap van der Wal. He's an embryologist and anatomist from Holland, and he was heavily influenced by Steiner, and he uses the comparative morphological method which is based on Goethe's way of seeing the world, because he was very worried about applying Newtonian science to live beings. And we'll see how he uses it. So in this method, it's not a reductionist method. We can take two objects and we can compare them. So in there, we have the egg and we have the sperm. Now, if you look at her, she's enormous. It's the one cell we can see with the naked eye. She can hardly move. She rolls around. She's full of cytoplasm. And where he stripped virtually all the cytoplasm. He's highly mobile. And together they form a polarity. So she has what he hasn't, and he has what she hasn't. So let's see what happens when they get together. This is the fertilization process. Most of us are under the idea that one sperm comes in the fastest and the most strong and wins a race. Well, this is nothing like that. Okay, yes? all of us in this room, by the ages, were conceived like that. Not all of the people in this room in the future will have been conceived by light. Okay. New methods of fertilization are changing, and we have, as human beings, also have a right to question whether ethically we're changing boundaries. Under natural circumstances, this takes about 6 hours, the stance of love, and then she lets one in. She lets one in. With the new method of sperm injection, her crown is taken off. That the haze around her is known as the crown, and his tail is cut off, and he's put in an injection, and it's driven into her. We now have 8 million little beings on this planet who've made by fertilization in vitro. We do not know the long-term consequences of this. This is a live experiment going on, and we do not know the consequences. I'm not going to go more into that, but I feel all of us must question how far we're allowing scientific technology to go with something they know very little about. So after fertilization, the zygote doesn't multiply, it divides. It goes into cleavage, and we go through the various stages. First of all, it's 2 and 4, and then they begin dying off in the center. And finally, we see what will become the germinal disc there. Now, Van der Waal calls this the mineral phase, and the way of being of this phase is largely, he explains it as following the laws of physics and mechanics, and he calls it largely outside time, because this phase does not, it takes place loosely in space in the uterus. But when we get to 7 days, something has to change. This consciousness has to change, because otherwise it will abort. And he calls the next stage the plant phase, and you can see why. In the first phase, development starts from a non-visible center, and now in the plant phase, it starts on the outside. And like any plant, it's got to put down roots. And these little fingers, you see, go down, but they don't actually go into the mother's bloodstream, but there's transference of chemicals and information between the plant phase, and this also will send out hormones to the mother's pineal gland for acceptance. That phase continues, it develops, and blood starts running from these feelers to the top of the embryo, to the top of the germinal disc. Blood starts running to the top of the germinal disc. There's no heart. Science calls heart a pump. So we have our first, do we know how it's running, why it's running? On day 17, when blood now is running from, we can say our roots, to the top of the germinal disc, pulsation starts. And that is the heart primordium. And instead of growing up like a plant, a largely two-dimensional entity starts forming to be a three-dimensional entity as this curves down and starts going down towards where we have our heart today. But on the way down, it folds in a certain way. Now, to understand how it folds, we have to know the work of Torrent-Guasp, another fantastic scientist who spent 50 years of his life literally unraveling the heart. Torrent-Guasp. Torrent-Guasp, yeah? So he, he thought, well, the heart has to be something more than's been talked about. And he started boiling animal hearts. And eventually, if you look at an animal heart, you'll see the sort of lines and ligaments and that. He started putting his finger in the ligaments, and suddenly he had a band, a muscular band. And you can see it here, right? So it's a muscular band with the two tube entrances, and it's folded in a certain way. And again, referring to his work and other scientists, let's go back. As it folds, it actually starts curving. And at 20-day, when it's just like a tube, then the heart, which is really 5 hearts in a worm, resembles that of a worm. At 28 days, it's now curved more, and it's fish-like. Then it carries on, and it resembles reptiles and amphibians, and between 35 and 50 days, it's like the heart of birds and mammals. So this tube folds. It forms the holes within the tube, but it folds. And what is it? It folds into a double helix. Now, we all know double helixes to do with chromosomes. I just feel that this work is so important. He died in 2002. But if we're talking about entanglement, where's Chris? Maybe we live in an entangled system, and if we're changing our hearts, we're also changing our chromosomes. Yeah. Again, I leave these open questions, but they sort of seem to be such an obvious interaction between the two. And another thing I want to go is the work on the spinal column. We saw that there was a line in the unfertilized ovule, a potentiality. Well, when we start forming form, the first thing we have is a primal streak. That turns into the notochord. The notochord closes up, and now we have the spinal column. And finally, we have the nervous system, which is developing at the same time. Funnily enough, the development of the notochord of this goes through exactly the same stages that took thousands of years to develop, from like a worm, so to fish, to reptile. So as I'm not a primary researcher, I had to look at other people's research. But if you put them side by side, looking at embryos, we find the same development in one and the other. So maybe we're in an entangled system that is mirrored, just taking the heart, the development of the heart, and the development of the backbone. It's not caused by anything, but it's entangled, and as one develops, the other develops. Maybe this is a whole. Non-duality, or form, which when we look for consciousness in the brain, but if we're a whole, that consciousness has to be all over. And yes, we can see some reflection of it in the brain, but we could see some reflection of it in the heart if we looked. And maybe we'll see some reflection of it in our cells. Because a whole is never just one part. It's a whole. So here I ask the relationship between the line of Burr and the notochord. So they all argue, or most of them argue, it's a dynamic system. Dynamic system means that it'll change in time. So we have the line of Burr, but that's like a static mirror or static picture. We have conceptus that seems to put something in process, in action. And how does this work? So we have a form, a process unfolding in time. Arke suggests that the core principle of local existence, cosmic existence, and universal existence is pulsation. And I think the Sumerians chose the heartbeat of 60 pulsations a minute for a certain reason, because of relativity to yourself. The universe is unfolding in time, marked on the perfect heartbeat of 60. So, what is the interplay between electric fields and the unfolding of the universe? We could try and suggest that spirituality has got to do with electric fields, and I think it has. Some suggest that the electric fields actually are the soul. But if we go into the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about the body is called the field. We've decided it is a field unfolding. And the knower of the field is not the knower. You have to have a knower of the field. So we have to decide who we are. Are we the field, or can we synchronize with the knower of the field to know more about actually what we are? The point in Indian philosophy is that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. So if we can really know about this field, me as a body, I can know more about the universe and how that works. So we have the soul or self, which is a postulated concept. And this is what knows the field. You have your thinking mind, you have knowledge of things outside. But once we go to subliminal layers, and we know the heart creates the greatest field in our body, maybe that field is interacting with other fields. And we got something like this with Chris. And maybe the sensitive part of ourselves, which we hardly recognize, is able to pick up information from that field, and it knows through sensitivity what's going on, not through our thinking mind. So maybe we can call that the soul or the self. So, summing up, duality or not duality? Is there a force, that Burr's life force, that is the soul? Are we bodies or individuals experiencing life through our bodies? Are we living beings taking different forms during our embryonic development? Now, remember the theories of evolution, but in form, we seem to have changed rather like a butterfly, from being mineral formed to plant formed to various shapes, animal forms. Is the universe an expression of one entity, consciousness, higher self, taking different forms? What is the relationship between the individual soul and consciousness or the higher self? And then there's this lovely poem from Rumi. Remember, this was before they could investigate embryology. This was done on intuition alone. And he says, I died from minerality and became vegetable. And from vegetativeness, I died and became animal. I died from animality and became man. Then why fear disappearance through death? Next time I shall die, bringing forth wings and feathers like angels. After that, soaring higher than angels, what you cannot imagine, I shall be that. I was going to end there, but I feel as a woman, I've got to talk about this process. It's precious. When we realize that we live in the universe, but there's a universe within us. We are allowing technology to mess with these forces. And I'm talking as a woman, we've allowed man to take more and more control of a process that was purely the creative act of women. We were told we were burnt at the stake for being midwives. We were told that having a baby, we were almost ill and have to go to hospital. Now we're being told that to conceive the perfect child, we actually have to select the genes and make a baby. The next stage is that a womb's going to be made. I have to say this. Either we say no, now, or it's going to unfold. We can create our future. Rob now showed us a future yesterday. It's not my future. Thank you. I want life to continue on this planet. Women, as Lisa said, are caretakers of life. If we do not find our voices and speak up, it could be too late. They're already launching satellites of 5G into space. Not many people know about them, but I've heard birds fall dead. They're going to affect those fine electric currents we talked about here in this presentation. We're going to spread education, but what type of education? We're taught to think only with our minds. When Columbus arrived in America, big deal, but we're not taught how to breathe properly. We're not taught how to deal with our emotions. Is that the type of education we want to make an internet out of and spread to, I think, 30,000 million people? Do we want to leave this planet and go to the moon and and have out of space stages? We must all be part of this process. Why can we let a few businesses, for economic reasons, control our lives? And this has all got to do with the embryo. Who are we? Where are we going? What do we want? So I believe there's 5 minutes left. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for listening. And I pray you all make a difference to our future.